May 31, 1902, Buenos Aires, Argentina. The night was heavy with perfume and rain. The lamps along Junin Street glowed through a mist that softened everything. Marble, wrought iron, grief. Inside a grand mansion in Recoleta, the Cambaceres family was hosting a small gathering. Musicians played quietly in the parlor. Crystal chimed against crystal. And amid the glitter and soft chatter, 17-year-old Rufina Cambaceres smiled, unaware that within a few hours, her name would become a legend whispered through centuries. Rufina was the daughter of the celebrated writer Eugenio Cambaceres, long deceased, and his widow Luisa Bacicci, a woman of Italian descent, known for her beauty and her tragedies. Born into privilege, Rufina had inherited her father's dark eyes, her mother's refinement, and a melancholy curiosity about the mysteries of life and death. The world adored her, and the city's newspapers adored her more. That evening, as she prepared to attend the opera with friends, Rufina suddenly collapsed at the threshold of her room. The candle she had been holding fell and rolled across the marble floor, leaving a thin trail of wax like a lifeline. Servants rushed to her side. Her skin had gone pale. Her breath was faint, then gone. The doctor, summoned within minutes, examined her pulse and declared the word that ends everything. Muerta! The family's mourning began before dawn. Her body, dressed in silk and lace, was placed in the family's ornate mausoleum within Cementerio de la Recoleta, the cemetery of Buenos Aires elite, a marble city of angels and tombs, where the dead lived closer to the living than anywhere else in Argentina. The ceremony was quiet. A light drizzle fell. The air smelled of roses and earth. When the coffin was sealed and slid into its resting place, Luisa fainted. It should have ended there. But death, it seems, had other plans. A few days after the burial, the cemetery caretaker, Senor Alvarez, noticed something strange during his nightly rounds. From the direction of the Cambaceres mausoleum, he heard a sound. Faint at first, like wind between the statues, then sharper, rhythmic, knock, knock, knock. He froze. He had heard rats before, the scrape of branches, even the whisper of rain against marble. But this was different, deliberate, human. He approached the mausoleum, lantern trembling in his hand. The sound stopped. The air felt thick, alive with silence. He turned the key in the iron gate, stepped inside, and raised the lantern toward the bronze door of the tomb. The glass trembled. A whisper, or was it a sigh, brushed against his ear. He ran. The next morning, he told the family. They dismissed it as superstition, the wind in the crypts. But that night, other workers heard it too. Cries, soft and muffled, from deep inside the marble. By the third night, rumors spread beyond the cemetery walls. People spoke of the lady who knocked. Children dared each other to linger near her tomb. Finally, the family ordered the coffin opened. When the workers removed the lid, the air that escaped was not the scent of decay, but something stranger. A dry, stale breath of roses. Rufina's body was still whole, but her fingers were bloodied. Her nails had torn. The interior of the coffin lid was scratched in desperate, chaotic lines. Her face bore an expression that would haunt those who saw it for the rest of their lives. Eyes wide, mouth open, frozen between a scream and a prayer. The physician who had pronounced her dead examined her again and found that she had likely suffered from a cataleptic episode, a rare condition that mimics death, slowing the heartbeat to imperceptible levels. She had awakened in darkness, surrounded by silence, and fought until her strength failed. Her second death was genuine. Her mother fainted again at the sight. For weeks, Luisa wandered the house in silence, murmuring her daughter's name to no one. Some said she refused to eat. Some said she went mad. What is certain is that she ordered a new coffin with a glass lid and a mausoleum with doors that could be opened from the inside. Rufina was laid to rest once more, in the same crypt, but not in peace. Years passed. Buenos Aires changed. Horse-drawn carriages gave way to automobiles. Recoleta filled with marble palaces of the dead. Angels with broken wings. Mothers frozen in eternal mourning. Generals with their victories carved in stone. But Rufina's tomb was different. Her statue stood at the entrance, life-sized and lifelike, carved from pale Carrara marble. The sculptor had captured her mid-step, as though emerging from her own tomb, hand on the bronze door, eyes lifted toward the living world. The door behind her was slightly ajar. Visitors called her La Dama de Blanco, the lady in white. Caretakers began to report strange things. At dusk, the hinges of her bronze door sometimes creaked, though there was no wind. On quiet mornings, the scent of roses drifted from the crypt, though no flowers had been left for days. And on certain nights, when fog gathered between the mausoleums like smoke, people heard footsteps, light, hurried, on the gravel paths. One night, in 1923, a young couple, walking through the cemetery after a concert, claimed they saw a woman in white standing near Rufina's tomb. Her face was hidden by a lace veil, her posture graceful, elegant. Thinking she was a mourner, they approached. She turned towards them. Her eyes were pale, not empty, but almost translucent, like glass filled with tears that would never fall. She opened her mouth as if to speak. No sound came. Then, as the fog rolled across the path, she was gone. The next morning, the caretaker found fresh scratches on the bronze door of the Cambaceres mausoleum. Decades passed, and the story deepened. Some said they had heard her crying softly among the tombs. Others said she walked toward the cemetery gate at dawn, as though forever trying to leave, only to vanish when the first sunlight touched the iron bars. In the 1950s, a gravedigger claimed he saw her reflection in a puddle, not as she was carved, but as she had been buried. Eyes wide, mouth open, fingers clawed in terror. When he looked up, she was gone, but the water rippled as though disturbed by a hand. Every generation added its version. Tour guides spoke of her as a tragic heroine, the sleeping beauty of Recoleta. Teenagers whispered that if you pressed your ear to her mausoleum door at midnight, you could still hear the faint scratching from within. In 1977, a night guard named Mateo, a skeptic, a man who laughed at ghost stories, took a job patrolling the cemetery after a series of thefts. His first week passed uneventfully, but one humid night, as he passed the Cambaceres crypt, his flashlight dimmed. He tapped it, muttering, and heard, faintly, a sound from inside. Tap, tap, tap. He leaned closer. The air smelled faintly of roses and dust. "Who's there?" he asked, his voice trembling despite himself. Silence. Then, from behind the bronze door, the sound again. Not frantic, but patient. Like someone politely asking to be let out. He turned the handle. It didn't move. He stepped back, heart pounding, as a whisper floated through the crack in the door. A woman's voice, soft and distant, saying something he could not quite make out. He fled. The next morning, his flashlight was found on the ground, still warm, batteries drained. The metal casing bore 3 thin scratches, perfectly parallel, like fingernails drawn across steel. Mateo never returned to work. Today, the Recoleta Cemetery is one of Buenos Aires' most visited sites. Tourists wander its labyrinthine alleys, cameras ready, speaking in low voices as if in church. Cats weave between the tombs. The air is thick with the scent of lilies and humidity. Rufina's mausoleum remains one of its most haunting attractions. Guides tell her story with reverence. The girl buried alive, the knocks in the night, the statue reaching out toward freedom. Some claim the sculptor himself refused payment, saying the marble had something in it already, a soul. Her tomb is easy to find. Follow the path from the main entrance past the angel with the broken wing. Turn left at the cross-shaped corridor, and you'll see her, eternally poised between life and death, her hand on the door, her eyes looking toward the living. They say the temperature drops when you stand near her. They say cameras fail, batteries die, whispers echo. A few claim that if you visit on the anniversary of her burial, June 3rd, and listen closely, you can hear faint music, as if from a distant opera. Others swear they've heard the knock, 3 soft raps coming from beneath the marble. The cemetery workers no longer make their rounds after sunset. She doesn't like to be disturbed, one of them says, crossing himself. Over a century has passed, yet Rufina's story endures, retold in books, documentaries, whispered in twilight tours. Perhaps because it is not just a ghost story, but a mirror for our own fears, of being unheard, unseen, buried before being truly known. Her legend, like her statue, remains poised in that terrible moment between entrapment and escape. And still, some nights, as the city quiets and the fog rolls in from the river, someone walking along Junin Street might look through the wrought iron gates and see a pale figure wandering the narrow corridors of marble. A woman in white, holding a small bouquet of roses, her eyes searching, not for vengeance, but for a door that opens the right way. The wind through the trees might sound like her sigh. The soft scrape of branches might echo her eternal knocking, because death, in Recoleta, is never truly silent. And somewhere beneath the marble and the centuries, the girl who was buried alive is still awake, still listening, still reaching for the handle from the inside. August 14th, 1933, Buenos Aires, Argentina. The air beneath the city was thick with coal dust and electricity. The newly built Subte Line A, Argentina's pride and Latin America's first subway, pulsed with the rhythm of progress. Marble-tiled stations gleamed, brass railings shone, and the smell of oil mixed with perfume from the crowds above. But between the bustling stops of Alberia and Congreso lay a smaller, quieter place, Pasco Sur, a half-forgotten twin platform, soon destined for closure. That night, it was almost empty. At 10:47 p.m., the last train of the day rattled toward Pasco. The operator, a young man named Julian Torres, was counting the seconds until his shift ended. He had driven the same route for years, from Plaza de Mayo to Primera Junta and back, and knew every flicker of light, every sigh of the tunnels. But as his train neared Pasco, he noticed something unusual. A shape, faint and white, near the edge of the platform. He squinted through the glass. The signal lights blinked red. The air seemed to thicken. And then he saw her. A woman, standing perfectly still in the dim light. She wore a wedding dress. Long, heavy and bright, even beneath the yellow bulbs. Her veil trailed like mist. Her hands clutched a bouquet of lilies. For a moment, he thought it was a prank, some drunk reveler in costume. But then she turned her head toward him, and he saw her face. Pale, empty, eyes dark as wet coal. Julian slammed the brakes, sparks flaring. The train screeched, metal against metal. Too late. The figure stepped forward. When the train finally stopped, the impact echoing down the tunnels, the platform was empty. No blood, no body. Only a faint chill that drifted into the carriages like a breath. The passengers whispered prayers. Someone said the woman had smiled before she vanished. The police searched for days but found nothing. No missing bride, no reports of suicides that fit the description. The newspapers wrote it off as hysteria. Subway ghost story spreads among workers, one headline mocked. Julian was questioned, then quietly reassigned. Within months, Pasco Sur was closed to the public, officially for signal synchronization reasons. Unofficially, no one wanted to drive past it, but the ghost remained. Years later, the legend grew. Workers repairing tracks near Pasco began to report strange occurrences. Tools vanished, lights flickered, and sometimes, late at night, a faint humming filled the tunnels. A woman's voice, carrying an old tango melody. One worker, Ramon Escudero, told his story in a tavern near Once Station in 1947. He had been part of a team cleaning debris after an electrical failure. Around 2 a.m., while the others took a break, he stayed behind to inspect a junction box near the closed platform. He said the air turned cold. His breath fogged. When he looked up, he saw her, standing across the tracks, veil fluttering as if underwater. Her dress was tattered now, her bouquet of lilies wilted and grey. She was crying, Ramon said, voice shaking. Not loud, not like a person, more like the rails were crying through her. He called out, "Señora?" But she didn't move. She only raised her hand and pointed toward the tunnel. Then, as the lights flickered, she dissolved into smoke. When his team returned, they found him pale and trembling. On the tunnel wall behind him, drawn in fresh chalk, was a white cross. He swore it hadn't been there before. The legend said her name was Lucia Ferreira. She had lived in the San Cristobal district, a seamstress's daughter with a laugh that drew attention wherever she went. At 22, she was engaged to Arturo, a clerk for the railway company. Their love, neighbors said, was pure and theatrical, like something out of a tango lyric. Arturo had promised her the world, a house, a family, a lifetime of devotion. Their wedding was set for the spring of 1933. Invitations printed, dress prepared, church reserved. But the day before the ceremony, Lucia received a letter, not from Arturo, but from a friend who had seen him dining with another woman in Palermo, laughing, holding her hand. Lucia waited for him that night. He never came. The next morning, she put on her gown and veil, walked through the city alone, and descended into the underground. Witnesses later claimed to have seen her buy a single ticket to Plaza de Mayo. She rode in silence. She never returned. The station operator on duty remembered hearing screams, a white shape moving against the dark. Then silence. They found no body, only the bouquet, crushed between the rails. For decades, the bride of the underground became a myth stitched into the city's veins. Old motormen refused to look at Pasco Sur when passing. They said she stood there sometimes, invisible, until you looked directly into the reflection on the tunnel glass. Then she'd appear behind you. By the 1960s, train operators reported malfunctions near that stretch of track. Lights flickered red for no reason. Circuits shorted. Passengers spoke of hearing weeping between stops, though no one was there. One maintenance supervisor, Carlos Medina, recorded his experience in a notebook found after his death in 1971. The entry read, "She appeared again, Same place, same smell, lilies, damp earth. She walked toward me, not touching the ground. Her veil brushed the rails. I heard her say my name. My name. I don't know how she knew it. I ran, but the tunnel followed me. The sound of her steps was still behind me long after I reached the next platform. That same night, the power grid tripped across Line A. When the lights returned, the white cross painted near Pasco had been wiped clean, only to reappear days later, brighter. Even as technology modernized the subter, the haunting refused to fade. In 1989, a group of engineers surveying the old tunnels for expansion found the entrance to Pasco Sur half sealed with concrete. Inside, the air was icy, though it was midsummer. The walls were damp with condensation. In the dust near the edge of the platform, they found shoe prints, small, delicate, recent. One of them, engineer Rossi, described hearing faint sobbing while measuring the cables. The sound came from the closed tunnel leading it east. When he approached with his flashlight, the beam dimmed, and then a whisper, soft, tired. Arturo. The sound of her name spoken in the dark made him drop the flashlight. It shattered. When he looked up again, the tunnel was empty. He quit his post that week. The team painted a new white cross on the wall before leaving. By the early 2000s, urban explorers began sneaking into the abandoned stations at night. Videos appeared online, shaky footage of graffiti, rusted tracks, the echoing emptiness of forgotten platforms. One video, uploaded anonymously in 2008, caught attention across Argentina. It showed the interior of Pasco Sur, lit only by a flickering flashlight. The explorer's voice was casual at first. Jokes, commentary about the decay, then the sound of a train in the distance, then silence, and then, faintly, a woman's voice. A single word. ¿Por qué? Why? The flashlight trembled. The camera turned toward the tunnel. In the far distance, a white shape moved, growing larger, floating just above the ground. The video cut to static. When police investigated, they found no trespassers. But the cross on the wall had been repainted again, this time in chalky streaks that seemed to drip like tears. To this day, subway staff avoid mentioning her by name. They refer to her as La Novia, the bride. Passengers who ride the last train of the night sometimes report cold drafts between Congreso and Alberti, as if someone unseen has brushed past. Others claim to see a faint white reflection in the window glass, a figure walking alongside the moving train, keeping perfect pace until the lights of the next station drown her out. One motorman, interviewed in 2017, described it this way. Sometimes the radio cuts out there, all the other tunnels, fine. But at Pasco Sur, it's like the air swallows the signal. Once, I felt a chill behind me in the cabin. The mirror showed a bit of lace, like a veil, just for a second. I didn't turn around. I just kept driving. When I reached the next stop, the bouquet smell was still there. Tourists today, taking guided ghost tours of Buenos Aires, are sometimes shown the sealed entrance to Pasco Sur. Guides tell them about the woman who stepped into the dark for love, and how she still wanders the rails looking for the man who betrayed her. The paint of the white cross is renewed every few years, by someone. No one knows who. They say, if you stand near it and close your eyes, you can hear her wedding. March echo faintly beneath the sound of trains. The hollow rhythm of eternity, repeating underground. No one ever found Arturo. Some say he fled the country. Others say he drowned in the Rio de la Plata, haunted by guilt. But there are those who believe he never escaped at all. That when the trains fall silent after midnight, and the tunnels sigh with old air, the bride finds him again, over and over, in the dark. Sometimes, a driver will swear he's seen two figures walking along the track between stations. A man in a black suit, a woman in white beside him, before both vanish into the tunnel's mouth. The city keeps moving above, unaware of the love story repeating below. And still, the legend endures. A young woman betrayed, a wedding dress stained with dust, a name whispered through the wires of the oldest subway line in South America. Late at night, when the last train glides through the tunnels, the lights flicker once, and if you're close enough to the window, you might see her reflection, the bride of Pasco Sur. Veil fluttering like smoke, bouquet pressed to her chest. Some say she's searching for forgiveness. Others believe she's waiting for the train that will finally take her somewhere light can reach. Until then, she walks the underground city, white against black, eternal against time, and every echo of footsteps, every sigh of cold air, might just be her passing by. Because in Buenos Aires, even beneath the earth, love never truly dies. It only changes shape, and sometimes it puts on a wedding dress before it goes looking for you. October 12th, 1923. Buenos Aires, Argentina. The tower was new enough to smell of plaster and varnish, but old enough to have learned the language of night. Palacio Barolo, a white rib cage of a building along Avenida de Mayo, had opened its doors to the city with a promise disguised as a monument. A lighthouse at the top, a poem carved in stone, a labyrinth for the living. It was an architecture of believing. Dante's hell below, purgatory ascending, and at the crown, a beacon meant to whisper of paradise. In daylight, people crane their necks to admire its tiers, its arches, its ornamental sea monsters frozen mid-curl. In darkness, the tower breathed. The guard who first heard it inhale was named Hector. He was 29. A veteran of quiet hallways, he had the slow patience of a man who could listen to a building and tell if its bones were settling or if something else was moving. On that October night, the offices slept behind frosted glass. The streetcars rattled like distant rain. Hector walked his round with a brass key ring and a thermos of mate, counting doors the way a monk counts prayers. He was passing the stairwell between the second and third floors, where the floors still smelled faintly of burnt rope from the recent lighting tests, when he felt it. A draft without a source, a thin thread of cold slipping downward, as though the building was exhaling through its spine. He paused, hand on the iron railing, and heard the breath become words. Not speech. A murmur, the kind paper makes when many pages are turned at once. He told himself it was the wind. He told himself 1,000 trapped currents lived in such a place. Later, when the light at the crown turned like a slow eye over the river, he climbed to the basement to check a fuse box. The lower corridors had been poured first, a concrete underworld, humming with pipes. The architect had named them deliberately. The inferno in reinforcement bars and conduits, the 9 circles conflated into vaults that smelled of damp limestone and oil. Hector stepped around coils of wire and crates, destined for tenants who would never use them, and found the fuse box calm, the breakers leaning back in their slots like resting teeth. That was when he heard the second sound, a footfall, then another, light, bare, maybe the shoes of a woman, the heel barely scuffing. He moved his flashlight toward the noise. The beam found only dust. The footsteps paused, as if a figure he could not see had turned toward him politely to let him pass. He said, "¿Quién anda ahí?" into the sensible gloom. The sensible gloom said nothing back. The men who had worked on the dome said many things in those first months. They said the light was too bright, that it could be seen from ships in the estuary like a second moon. They said the architect, an Italian, who read Dante by candlelight and sketched devils for fun, had tried to bring the ashes of the poet to rest in the building's heart. As if a dead man's dust could change the electricity that ran through the wires. They said the elevators, with their cage doors and their fussy bells, had learned to climb with a kind of yearning, eager to reach the higher floors where the air was thinner, cleaner, nearer to whatever truth the eye imagined when it saw the rotating beacon. Hector didn't trade in stories. He traded in locks and circuits and the polite nods of men in suits. But over the next week, he noticed how the stairwells seemed to hold an echo too long, how footsteps came in pairs when he walked alone. He noticed how the underground chamber beneath the main hall, a room meant for storage, its floors polished smooth as a tongue, smelled some nights like damp wool and ash, as if someone had brought rain in their coat pockets. One night, he brought his thermos down to that chamber and sat on a crate to drink. He told himself out loud, as if to an impatient child, that a building built to resemble a journey must be expected to perform. He said this, and sipped, and listened to the copper tick of cooling pipes. Then the overhead light flickered, not in the clumsy way a bulb dies, but in a thoughtful pulse. On, off, on, as if answering something. Upstairs, in the offices rented to importers and lawyers, a typist named Elvira packed her things, the last to leave after balancing the day's accounts. She hesitated by the elevator. The stairwell looked cleaner, safer, but the office manager had told them to trust the modern contraptions or be fired for stubbornness. Elvira, who wore her hair pinned back tight and kept a rosary in her purse for reasons that embarrassed her, stepped into the elevator cage and pulled the gate closed. As the elevator descended, she watched the floors slide by like pages turning. Third, second, ground. The cage did not stop. She yanked the lever. The handle refused to answer a small betrayal in polished metal. The cage slid past the lobby's glow and entered the throat of the tower. It stopped in darkness. Elvira could hear her breath. It sounded too loud. Somewhere far below, something moved. A drag, a whisper, a soft cloth against stone. She called for the operator, then for any saint who could be bothered. The elevator gate rattled once, lightly, as if touched by a hand. It opened. There was no one there. Only the underworld corridor, lit by a single bulb. Elvira stepped out, because the alternative was to remain inside a machine that had chosen to be a coffin. She told herself she knew the way to the main hall by heart. She took 5 steps and stopped because the corridor did not look like the corridor she knew. The floor felt different under her shoes. Warmer. The air had that faint wave a heat makes when it leans up off stone. Ahead, a small red glow appeared, as if a coal had been set down to mark a path. She followed the glow because it was preferable to following nothing. Around a bend, the corridor widened into a room she had never seen. A circle of concrete with niches like mouths. In the niches stood statues she didn't remember from any day's labor. Figures with wings folded forward like cloaks, their faces veiled by dust. On the far wall, a door she knew could not exist. Small, iron, stubborn-looking, the sort one sees in dreams and recognizes immediately. When she approached it, something whispered behind the door. She pressed her ear to the iron. It felt cool. Whisper, whisper. She could not hear words, only the rhythm of human confiding. She said, without entirely choosing to, I can't open it. The whisper paused. Then, in a little flurry like the sound silk makes when a woman turns quickly, it returned. Elvira stepped away. The red coals glowed, dimmed as if amused. She found the elevator again by cheating, by thinking of the lobby as if the idea itself could be a magnet. When she reached the cage, the lever behaved like a repentant sinner. In the lobby, the night guard looked up from his desk and asked if she had any trouble. She said no and carried her rosary home in her fist. The building learned its habits. Lights flickered at the same points along the corridors. Footsteps paused on the same mezzanines. Tenants began to remark on the view from the lighthouse, a slow turning paradise over the river, and the way the stairwell above the 13th floor produced a peculiar echo, the sort a voice makes when it is trying not to sound like a sob. A photographer set his camera on the spiral stairs to capture the dome's ribs in a long exposure, and developed, later, a smear of shadow crossing the bottom step like a robe dragged by someone invisible. Guards came and went. Hector stayed until 1932, when a man with a pistol decided a bank office safe could teach him wealth. After that night, the blood on the tiled lobby, the scream, the powder in the air like flour. Hector requested a different building. Before he left, he took one more walk down to the underground chamber and sat on the same crate. He listened. The murmur came, not from the pipes, but from within the concrete itself, as if the mix had contained crushed pages and the pages remembered being read. He said goodbye to no one. He left his keys in a neat row on the desk and avoided looking up at the lighthouse for fear it would wink. The tower did not grow quieter without him. New guards walked new rounds. One, a man named Ortiz, who believed in nothing except his wife and the value of keeping shoes polished, confessed to a colleague that he had heard on the stairwell a conversation between two men and a woman, all speaking at once in whispers that braided. Another time, he chased the smell of violets up to the 32nd floor and found the observation balcony door open to a night with no wind. He closed it and felt, as he turned the key, the sensation one has when someone watches from a window, unseen behind lace. In the war years, the beacon was dimmed. The city slept without its turning eye. Night, guards reported that the building felt heavier, as if its intention had been damped and it resented the insult. Lights resented being turned on. Elevator cables sang low moans when no one was inside. A typist fell on the 9th floor stair and broke her wrist, claiming she had moved to avoid a man standing in her path. A man no one else saw. A man whose breath smelled like cloves and whose cravat was out of fashion by decades. The story aching to be told was always the same, adjusted by belief. Some said the architect had placed numbers with such care, 22 floors to represent the stanzas, 9 access points to honor the circles, that the building had become a device, a keyed instrument. Others thought the city itself had chosen the tower as a throat, a place to exhale its unfinished prayers. A priest refused to bless an office suite on the purgatorio level, saying the stairwell had too many listeners. He performed the blessing anyway and lost consciousness halfway through. When he woke, he could not recall the prayer's end. By the 1970s, the basement door Elvira had found did not exist on any plan. Yet maintenance men would sometimes arrive late for their shift, claiming the route had changed, a corridor had curved differently, a gate had appeared, and then vanished like a thought you cannot recapture, once interrupted. A night guard in 1981 kept a notebook in which he recorded the phrases that distinct voices spoke as he passed. the way a naturalist records bird calls. Aquí. Todavía no. Escucha. Perdón. One morning, after a climb to the lighthouse left him breathless and suddenly weeping, he drew a small ladder in the margin and wrote, beneath it, we build ladders for the ones who can't climb. He showed the page to no one. If you took the tour in later years, a guide would explain Dante's logic, while the group stood in the lobby, necks back, admiring the ribbed dome and its stained glass oculus like an eye amused by your attention. He would say, hell is here, beneath your feet, among the storerooms and pipes. He would say, purgatory is the stair. Your calves will know the difference. He would say, heaven spins above us, a light searching a river. Then he would laugh and say, only at night, my friends. Only after midnight do the dead take the tour. People like to be frightened in daylight. At night, the same people looked away from their reflections in the elevator doors. A woman named Jimena worked the late shift as a cleaner in the 1990s. She knew every squeak of the floors and every office that would leave crumbs. One rain-heavy night, the lights along the stairwell flickered in the old pattern. Thoughtful on, thoughtful off, like a conversation conducted with eyelids. Jimena carried a bucket up to the 19th floor, where a lawyer's office smelled like paper and lemon oil, and a cigar no one admitted to smoking. Halfway up the next flight, she saw a figure standing at the landing. A man, or the shape of a man, in the suit of another era, hat in hand, posture apologetic. She stopped where she was. The bucket sloshed. The figure did not startle the way a living thing startles. It seemed to remember her from before. Jimena had the odd thought that she had kept an appointment without knowing. The figure raised its head slightly, not to look. Heads like that do not look so much as the angle, but to listen. She said, because the bucket water smelled of old soap and made her sad, do you need something? The figure's hat slid and fell. It did not hit the stairs. The figure blurred, like breath on glass, and was gone. Jimena climbed the rest of the way, and the air pressed against her as if she had walked through a curtain. On the lawyer's floor, papers had slipped from a desk and arranged themselves on the carpet in a spiral, as if blown by a considerate wind that understood symbols. She stood at the spiral's edge and felt a compulsion to step into it, to become its center. She did not. She gathered the pages and put them back. Page numbers misbehaving now, logic slightly off. When she passed the landing again, the hat lay there. Felt dark, dry, despite the rain. She left it. In the morning, it was not there, and no one spoke of finding it. What a portal is depends on what you think it lets through. A door, says the practical person. A metaphor, says the poet. An amplifier, says the electrician, who knows how a coil of copper can make a whisper into a shout. Palacio Barolo amplifies. It takes a murmur from the ground and runs it up the stairs until it arrives at the light and goes out over the city like breath on a cold day. A quarrel held between two lovers on the mezzanine grows gossamer and repeats at dawn in the dome's cartilage. A tenderness hiding inside. A prayer rasped in the basement finds itself 40 minutes later, tinkling in a light bulb filament. The prayer fixed to the glass like a fly in amber. A grief too heavy to be carried to the street remains, friendly as a cat and twice as loyal, waiting on a step where the foot that once made it lingers sometimes to remember. Tourists who disregard the signs and sneak to the upper floors after midnight report the same feeling. First the childish excitement of having broken a rule, then the breathlessness of the climb. Then the slowing, heartbeats becoming metronomes. Then the gaze. The gaze is not a pair of eyes. It is a location that behaves as if it were aware. It sits above the 23rd floor, on the turn where the stair reveals the ribbed interior of the dome. You feel it before you see anything. Your skin learns the lesson your mind refuses. You are never alone in a building built for souls. A young man named Ariel went up alone one summer night because his girlfriend asked for a story. He brought a flashlight and a bravado he would never have needed in daylight. At the turn above the 23rd, he felt the gaze, a pressure between his shoulder blades, a suggestion of presence like a held breath behind a door. He lifted the flashlight, which dimmed slightly, not as batteries die, but as if light itself had become shy. He took one step forward and heard a whisper. It did not come from ahead. It came from the curl of the stairs below. A voice that had been climbing behind him and now chose to announce itself. It said his name. Not Ariel as his mother said it. Not a lover's Ariel, but the name in its full shape, the way a teacher calls you from a register. He turned. The stair was empty. The whisper came again, closer. Then the dome above them exhaled. The light at the top, switched off that night for maintenance, brightened. Not with current, but with the slow, stubborn glow a thing acquires when it participates in a memory larger than itself. Ariel fled. In the lobby, he laughed, loud, explaining the climb to the security camera as if it were a person who might judge him for cowardice. He told his girlfriend nothing. He proposed a week later. He chose a different avenue for their photographs. Sometimes, standing in the street, a passerby will look up at the lighthouse and feel a flicker. The light is steady now, governed by schedules and safety codes. Yet something in its turning holds an irregular beat, a heartbeat with an extra syllable. Those who have worked in the building long enough learn to ignore the extra beat, or they learn to count along with it because it comforts them to be included in the rhythm. Every now and then, a stranger stops, held by the gaze that is not an eye, and feels for a moment that the tower has recognized him, lifted his name up the winds into the dome, and sent it out over the river to be returned as rain. The stranger shivers, calls it nonsense, and crosses the street. You may visit during daylight and find nothing strange. You may climb with a tour and marvel at the architect's cleverness. The ghosts dislike being scheduled. They are not hostile, precisely. They are present. They are the accumulation of intention in a place designed to model the soul's journey and then filled with the ordinary business of ledgers and stamps and late-night confessions to stairwells. They are what happens when a ladder is built and nobody tells the air not to climb it. It is said, by guards who speak softly and cleaners who know which doors breathe and which doors hold their breath, that the building does not want to hurt anyone. It wants to keep. It wants to remember. The whispers in the basement are not lures, but liturgy. The footsteps on the stair do not chase. They accompany. The gaze above the 23rd floor will follow you down only to the level where you can bear being seen, and then it will wait, like a patient page marked with a ribbon. If you find yourself there after midnight, try this. Stand on the landing where the dome reveals its ribs and listen, not for words, but for rhythm. The city will murmur through the masonry. The river will speak glass to glass, and the light at the crown will count the seconds like a rosary bead passed from finger to finger by a hand made only of air. Do not ask the building for proof. It will give you what all true places give, An outline in which to place your fear. A staircase where breath becomes prayer. A chamber where silence hums in the key of your name. Then walk down. Touch the railing. Feel how many palms have polished it. At the lobby, pause under the oculus. The glass will look like water. Somewhere beneath your feet, a whisper will move through the pipes, gather itself, and begin to climb. If you turn your head at the door, you may catch a shadow stepping aside to let you pass, a courtesy old as cathedrals. Outside, Avenida de Mayo will be slick with old rain and taxi lights. The lighthouse will turn as if thinking, and the tower, magnificent, instructive, and quietly ravenous, will hold its breath, counting, until someone else opens the door and asks it, without saying the words, to show them the way up